Nancy, and good morning, everyone. An absolute pleasure to be part of this third and final day of a very exciting and informative NYC Builds Bio Plus annual meeting. So in this opening session this morning, I'm joined and have the pleasure of hosting five true experts from the world of academic research and medicine in and around New York City. And the title of this opening session is The Life Science Innovation Pipeline Reports from the New York City Academic Medical Centers. I'll introduce these five authorities in just a couple of minutes. I just wanted to say a couple of things by way of introduction, both to my organization and to myself. So Sam, if I could have that slide up and we can talk about that. I've known Nancy for almost 20 years, dating back to 2002, when I was the editor of a startup publication called BioIT World out of Boston. We were a sister magazine to Mac World and Computer World and PC World, that family, published by IDG. And Nancy was making a name for herself and her organizations and employers by really stimulating life science development at companies like Spalding and Sly and Alexandria. And when I first met her, I knew she was going to be a valuable ally to us. I didn't necessarily know that she was going to be on the cover of the magazine about a decade later. But that's what happened. I remember reconnecting with Nancy in the late 2000s. She was branching out on her own, building her own company and looking for opportunities and contacts. And I said, well, if I think of anybody, I'll be sure to let you know. And that's always the sort of thing that one says to a friend without necessarily thinking that opportunity would strike. And then serendipitously it did. I'd also gotten to know a gentleman named Dietrich Stephan. Dietrich was a co-founder of one of the first consumer genetics companies in this country called Navigenics, a company he co-founded in Silicon Valley with David Agus. David Agus is Maury Povich's son-in-law and a familiar face to you. He's the medical correspondent on the CBS breakfast television program. They were competing with 23andMe, and that was a tough road in 2008, 2009. And Navigenics was eventually waved the white flag and was sold for parts to a big biotech company. But Dietrich had a lot of entrepreneurial zeal and struck a deal with Thermo Fisher to basically become a modern-day Craig Venter. He was promised that he would be the director of a new world-class genome center stocked with these latest Thermo applied bio sequencing instruments that can sequence a genome in about an hour or thereabouts. It was just one catch. Dietrich didn't have any host institution at that point. He had nowhere to put them. And so I introduced Dietrich to Nancy, thinking if anyone could figure out where to build a world-class genome center, it was Nancy Kelly. So the two of them went and figured out and researched a couple of sites before their gaze settled on New York City. I mean, this is a preposterous idea, if you think about it. But Nancy was absolutely convinced that putting a genome center in the heart of Manhattan was not only doable, but made sense for the field, for the local community. And even though Dietrich left and went off to do his own thing, he's now a professor at the University of Pittsburgh and the CEO of a very promising biotech company, Nancy was not to be deterred. So the rest, I think, is of the story you know. She's the founding executive director of the New York Genome Center. And I am absolutely convinced and will tell anybody that I don't think anybody else could have made that happen, not only for the vision, but also incredibly, and perhaps even more impressively, for knocking the heads together of every academic medical center in the region to get them to support and collaborate in building this world-class center. So it's great to remain in touch and be part of Nancy's current endeavors with NYC Builds Bio Plus and other things. I myself moved up to the New York area about 3 years ago. Next slide, Sam, please. to join the organization that publishes Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News, a venerable publication that has been covering developments in the life sciences and biotech industry for 39 years as of this month, 40th anniversary next year. I'm sure we'll have a big virtual party for that. Jen's been is going from strength to strength, and we're doing fine in this new virtual environment, as many companies are looking to put on virtual programs, as they sadly, as we all do, miss the camaraderie of live events. I'm also the executive editor of the Crispr Journal, a new journal devoted to the amazing world of CRISPR biology and genome editing. And we felt that that was such a ripe scientific field and medical field that it merited its own journal. So that journal launched about 3 years ago. And my final slide, please. I'm also the editor of a new book, I'm the author of a new book called Editing Humanity, The CRISPR Revolution and the New Era of Genome Editing, published earlier this month from Pegasus Books in New York. A breezy and deeply researched account, so the New York Times said, of the CRISPR revolution, and available in hardback, audiobook, ebook, and a good read. And this is a field I'm sure we'll touch on in our discussion, as CRISPR is a scientific topic that is clearly really enjoying some tremendous research accomplishments here in the New York area at Columbia, the Genome Center, Cold Spring Harbor, and many other institutions besides. So that's my little introduction. So the way this is going to work now for the next 85 minutes or so is we're going to invite each of our 5 panelists to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their operation and their organization. We'll give them 5-10 minutes if they need. A couple of them have brought slides along, so that's great. We'll get to them later on. Then we'll open it up to questions. And of course, the success of this discussion really hinges on you and your participation. We'd love to get your questions from the audience. You know how that works. There's a Q&A chat box down at the bottom of the taskbar. So please, at any time, enter your questions. If it's a specific technical question for one of our guests, that's fine. If it's a broader discussion topic, that's also fine. We would absolutely love to hear from you. So later on, you're going to hear from, we've been having a big debate this morning how to pronounce her last name, but Lisa Plakanica. We'll get that sorted a little bit. Oh, that's good. Thank you. Good. I should have taken a wager on that one. Kathleen Metters will also join us. Timothy O'Connor from Rockefeller. Second up will be Erik Lium from Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. But we're going to kick things off with Janis Paradiso, who is the director of the Office of Biotechnology and Business Development at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So good morning, Janis, and great to see you. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, and please take things away. We'd love to hear from you for the next 5, 8, 10 minutes about yourself and your organization.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, Nancy, and Mitch. And thank you for the opportunity to be here to discuss the exciting innovation and discovery at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where I serve as the director of the Office of Biotechnology and Business Development. So as the first presenter today, I just want to take the opportunity to set the stage. And I think it's clear that when one thinks of cutting edge biomedical research and innovation in New York City, the first thing they think of is the Bronx. Well, if you don't, I challenge you to expand the New York City universe about 10 miles northeast of Midtown, where Einstein is in the Morris Park section of the Bronx. While education is at the heart of Einstein's mission, it is biomedical research that drives our growth. Last year, Einstein has received $178 million in funding from the National Institute of Health, which actually ranks us number 7 in the nation of NIH funding per investigator. In the same year, Einstein researchers published over 3,000 peer-reviewed papers. Einstein is home to several major NIH-designated research centers, as well as centers of excellence. Those areas include cancer, diabetes, clinical and translational research, aging, intellectual development disorders, liver disease, AIDS, cardiovascular research, and stem cell and regenerative medicine. Some of our NIH centers also help to support Einstein shared facilities and cores For those that don't know, Einstein has many services available to its researchers, academic collaborators, and outside institutional and industry partners. 30 of the cores actually have their offerings available on the iLab Solutions platform and offer skilled expertise at competitive rates to further the acceleration of science in the New York City area. Einstein is part of the Montefiore health system, and Montefiore, as some may or may not know, is one of the nation's largest health systems, consisting of 10 hospitals, as well as primary and specialty care network of more than 200 locations across Westchester County, the Lower Hudson Valley, and the Bronx. Einstein's relationship with Montefiore supports a long-standing focus on bench-to-bedside research and capitalizes on the synergies and collaborations for research, teaching, and patient care. The shared Einstein-Montefiore mission of the pursuit of social justice in meeting the healthcare needs of all individuals, starting with the underserved population that resides in the Bronx, reinforces the collaborative spirit that exists at Einstein since its inception. The further alignment between researchers at Einstein and clinicians at Montefiore helped to accelerate the timeline of meeting that mission by striving to ensure that our research findings inform our clinical care and vice versa. The partnership with the health system has also resulted in the creation of Montefiore Einstein Centers of Excellence in Cancer Care, Cardiovascular Services, Transplantation, and Children's Health, where nationally recognized investigators and multidisciplinary clinical teams collaborate to develop and deliver advanced innovative care. At the Office of Biotechnology and Business Development, we're charged with the technology transfer mission of the institution. This involves working with our researchers on identifying intellectual property assets, looking for partners to help further the development of the exciting research and innovations coming from the Einstein-Monte system. This involves established companies and biotechs, as well as entrepreneurs and investors, to meet our institutional and personal goals of bringing the bench science discovered and developed here to the bedside to meet the public need. Thank you again for having us here, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Janis. That was great. So we'll come back to you, as you say, during the discussion. So now our challenge is to see if there is life outside of the Bronx, I guess. So to kick things off, Erik Lium is the president and CEO of Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. Good morning, Erik. Same drill. Look forward to hearing from you.
Sure, thank you. Pleasure to be here today. So I'm the Chief Commercial Innovation Officer for the Mount Sinai Health System, as well as our academic enterprise. Mount Sinai is obviously one of the largest clinical providers in the greater New York City metropolitan area, and one of the largest research enterprises for healthcare in the region. In terms of the comments that I prepared for today, it really focused on our activities related to company formation and the utilization of biomedical space within the New York City region. So I'm going to keep my comments relatively short. In 2020 and possibly moving into early 21, we anticipate the formation of 8 companies. Some of those will be growing more rapidly, obviously, than others. And in 2019, we launched 5 companies. We did take 1 company public on the NASDAQ this summer and anticipate another offering later this year. In regard to, and I should actually add that these companies actually represent the significant opportunity that is developed in diagnostics, particularly the fusion of diagnostics and artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're also pursuing opportunities in digital therapeutics and care management, and then more traditional therapeutics. In regard to specific programs that we've developed for supporting the development of technologies that would warrant the formation of new enterprises, we have a fund called the I3 Fund that we use to invest in advancing technologies from early stages to later stages, again, to warrant company formation. And this is really funds that can be deployed quite rapidly to advance those programs. And we're in the process of launching another fund that will likely be the I4 Fund, which will be a larger fund that we use for co-investing as we launch companies with other investors and partners. We have a very vibrant MSIP, so Mount Sinai Innovation Partners Fellows Program. I think currently this year we have just under 80 participants in that program. which is combined with an entrepreneurship program. And so we're very proud of what we've accomplished there and have seen a number of individuals, so a number of alumni from this program move on and move into the corporate sector and do great things. We also have a very vibrant entrepreneurship program that I alluded to a moment ago, which is sponsored by Alexandria Launch Labs, and that we are running on an annual basis and expanding, continually expanding. We're also working with the New York City Economic Development Corporation Life Science Internship Program, and Mount Sinai has launched a diversity and innovation hub to bring diversity and innovation together with inclusion. So those are some of the programs that we've developed and some of the statistics around companies that we're launching this year and early next year, and some of what we've done in the last year. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Erik, so we've actually heard from Renalytics AI yesterday or Tuesday. Very, very interesting story of how that got spun out and went public on the London Stock Exchange and now obviously in the US as well. And Cynthia Cleto actually will be talking about your entrepreneurship program in just a little bit. So those are kind of two concrete examples that we've got on our agenda to show how this commercialization develops. And I hope once everybody finishes introducing themselves, that we'll really be able to get into a conversation about how your institution actually fosters this. How do these companies get germinated and grow?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Great. And Erik, thank you for those remarks. We'll pass it over now to Tim O'Connor, Executive Vice President at the Rockefeller University. Tim.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for throwing it over to me. And thanks to you and Nancy for the invitation. It's been a pleasure working with Nancy with this NYC Builds Bio since it launched a few years ago. Been able to participate in more than one of these, and it's always a pleasure. So thanks for having me. As Kevin indicated, I'm the Executive Vice President at Rockefeller University. I briefly scanned the list of attendees and recognized a lot of the names, and so I'm not going to dwell a lot on Rockefeller. For those of you who are less familiar with Rockefeller, I'll just do maybe a minute. We're on the smaller side as opposed to what Erik referred to for Mount Sinai. We don't do clinical activities except for clinical research in our hospital. Our faculty is small but mighty on the score of about 70 to 75 faculty here. We're on 16 acres on the Upper East Side. It's worth noting, because I'll come back to this theme, that we actually share a street corner with Sloan Kettering and Weill Cornell. And that's something that all three institutions have leveraged over the years in this area and beyond. In terms of by the numbers, I mentioned the number of faculty, 70 to 75 labs here. We have about 200 students in our graduate program, about 300 to 400 postdocs at any given time on a campus that's got 23 to 2,400 people pre-COVID. Currently, we've got about 1,400 people on any given weekday on campus, and the rest are working from home. We run an annual budget of about 400 million, of which 250 to 300 million is research and development. Again, coming back to Tri-I, and this is sort of setting a bit of the pipeline for what I'm sure Kathleen will talk about. Tri-institutionally, at this corner, we've got an annual R&D budget, if you combine Sloan Kettering and Weill Cornell, an aggregate of over $750 million a year. We have spun out in the last 10 years about 60 companies. That's all three institutions combined in the aggregate. Any given year, about 100 licenses go out, of which 20 or so are typically exclusive for therapeutic programs. So it's a significant hub here on the Upper East Side. I should mention we have other neighbors as well, including HSS and the New York Blood Center, among others. At Rockefeller, I would say, while there's been a lot of activities in this space over the years, it was definitely catalyzed by Marc Tessier-Lavine's arrival in 2011 and the strategic plan that ensued. I got here in 2013, charged in part with trying to execute that plan. That included things like the Rockefeller only Robertson Therapeutic Fund, which has just been renewed. So using philanthropic resources to fund translational work at different stages. And I can talk more about that fund in the ensuing discussion. We also launched the Tri-I Therapeutics Discovery Institute. That's among the three neighbors here, and I can talk more about that. Many of you are familiar with it. And that led to the creation of Bridge Medicines. And Kathleen will obviously talk about that as well as TDI. She's involved with both. But I think the momentum has carried through. I think that Mark was obviously a leader in the city in this space. While there's been a lot going on in the city for decades, literally, as Kevin alluded to, Mark catalyzed Rockefeller's involvement for sure. I think it's notable that the transition, when Mark went on to be president at Stanford, there was sort of a question mark looming over Rockefeller in particular in terms of leadership in this space, and the fact that Mark's successor is Rick Lifton, physician scientist, active in this space, longtime scientific advisor at Merck, on the board at Roche and Genentech. So we really haven't missed a beat here locally. And in large part, I keep alluding to it, but I think the fact that it's something we should discuss moving forward, that has to do a lot with the fact of collaborations in the city. The fact that the institutions are doing so much to work together is really something that hadn't happened a lot before the last 10 years or so. I think there was bits and pieces of it, but there's been a lot more coming together of that. And to have the sort of city and the academic institutions collaborating and sort of rowing in the same direction is incredibly helpful. In terms of upcoming initiatives in our current strategic plan that I'll just put out there and be happy to take more questions about, we're looking to make some of our internal funds more sustainable. We're looking to launch a translational research accelerator. So many of you know we completed a research building in the past year. We've now populated it. So we have something that's highly unusual in New York City. We have excess space, and we're looking to use that creatively in ways that will do multiple things, including monetizing some of that space, but doing it in a mission-centric way for us. And that includes things like working to develop an on-site, an on-campus incubator that wouldn't only be for Rockefeller, but would be available for others as well. And then I'll conclude with an exciting program that we've already launched, which is our, in the area of diversity and inclusion, we've launched a specific women in science entrepreneurship fund that's now underway that follows on our longtime Women in Science program that has been in existence for decades. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on at Rockefeller and beyond, and I'm excited to be a part of it. And thanks again for having me, Kevin.
And congrats, Tim, on the recent Nobel Prize.
Oh, that old thing. Yeah,
That's the 29th or the 30th?
That's actually the 26th. It's the 26th. It's the, believe it or not, it's the 7th in the past 20 years in the areas of physiology and chemistry. And I have all sorts of blowing Rockefeller's horn stats about that in terms of where we would rank if we were a country and where we are compared to other institutions, but I will defer on that for now.
We don't want to hear any of that. We're going to move right along. It was a very nice segue. Thank you, Tim. It was a very nice segue to Kathleen Metters with Bridge Medicines. And I think most of the people probably know what Bridge is, but I'm new to this. So Kathleen, welcome to your a general introduction as well. And I know you've got some slides, so we'll cue those up too.
Yes, but don't panic. I think there's only 3 or 4 slides.
Okay.
Yeah. Just an aid memoir. So at what point do the slides come up, I should ask?
Any second now.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation. Nancy and Mitch and Kevin, thank you very much for the invitation. And really, it's my great pleasure because I'm speaking on behalf of the Bridge Medicine team and the CEO, Bill Polvino. And I should say that Bridge Medicine operates virtually, and the core team is actually very small, but they have accomplished a tremendous amount since their inception. And this is really down to, and I hope I give you a flavor for this in the next few minutes, down to the collaborative scientific network that they have been that they've managed to build. And why ask me to speak on their behalf when they're more than capable of doing it themselves? Well, I have the pleasure to chair the scientific advisory board. And so I am very much involved in their day-to-day activities. So if I could have the next slide. And the story, and Tim, thank you very much, because that was such a great introduction. The story of Bridge Medicine does start really with the creation of the Tri-Institutional Therapeutic Discovery Institute. I'm glad we can call it the TDI, because that's always been quite a mouthful. But this really was created because the three institutions, the Rockefeller, Weill, Cornell, Sloan Kettering, understood that they needed to give their academic investigators access to different types of tools, different types of expertise, so that they could really work in partnership with drug discovery experts to understand if their foundational science could be evolved to a point where it would become a new generation therapeutic. So that was really the mission behind the TDI. And they have been, kudos to them, they have been phenomenally successful. But equally, it became clear that the TDI, because they were dealing with, and so successful, they were dealing with a portfolio of very early discovery projects, then didn't have the bandwidth or the financing to take these early projects right the way through to clinical trials. As all of us who are in the business know, that is an extremely expensive and risky and involved process. So Bridge Medicine was created to do exactly that. And that's the name, to bridge from these developing discovery projects entering non-clinical or preclinical development to clinical trials in the hope of forming new cos to take these projects on to potential acquisitions, potential development, whatever their future may bring. So Bridge Medicines was created, whereas the TDI is a not-for-profit institution, Bridge Medicines was created as a for-profit institution, but funded again by Takeda, which gives a strong, which funds the TDI, which gives a strong bridge, but by two extremely experienced investor companies, Bay City Capital and Deerfield, who are not only very experienced in the field of biotechnology investing, but brought with them, I've worked with them very closely, a real passion for this idea that at least partially next generation therapies will come from groundbreaking academic research. So Bridge Medicine is small, as I said, it's on campus, it's there to bridge to clinical trials, and it does it really by forming this large and very, very flexible network of scientists. Many of the people involved have great contacts in the industry, so they can bring the right people in at the right time to address the questions of the projects. So if I go forward, one slide, please. So Bridge Medicines was designed really to be flexible and to try and create the smoothest possible path for academic investigators as they bring forward their science, do their day jobs, and try and gain expertise in what is a particular discipline of drug discovery. And so in order to do that, Bridge Medicines, the investors, as I said, very passionate, committed to pre-financing. So they committed to 30 million of financing prior to any projects entering Bridge. It was pre-staffed not just with the core group, but with people like me who bridge academic expertise into entrepreneurial activities, experience with biotech, and very importantly, experience in drug discovery. The three institutions and Bridge, everybody involved, got together to pre-negotiate license agreements that, to a great degree, understanding that each project has its own particular personality, a pre-baked license agreement. And this was done with the idea that once a project was thinking of being moved into Bridge by the folks involved, the path would be, and I use this term a little advisedly, relatively straightforward. It's housed on campus, and one of the great benefits of this, and of course we are going through this challenging time, but one of the great benefits of this is there's a tremendous amount of contact, not just between the Bridge staff and their collaborators and the academic investigators, but between the various networks that they're all bringing together. So I cannot tell you how many times the Bridge staff have said to me that they're living their halcyon days. They can walk around these campuses and get access to people whose, papers they've always read, whose work they've followed, and it's both a pleasure and a privilege. So the other thing I think is special about Bridge is that they've been fearless in saying, okay, we might not be bringing this project in, we might not have a license agreement yet, but we want to be good citizens within the company, and we want to facilitate projects and thinking. And so Bridge has been willing to engage and talk to investigators and their groups long before official project entry. And in many cases, as option agreements and license agreements have been moving forward, but still not inked, they've been willing to commit spend and expertise to keeping up with project development so as not to lose any momentum. The other thing I should say, that with Bridge being on campus and with activities going on campus, the academic investigators are able to choose to what extent they stay linked with these activities. And I think that's a great plus for them. So fine, well, next slide. The projects come into Bridge via the TDI. The TDI have, and it's in inverted commas, but a graduation process. And this really just means that the TDI, through their investigations, gather together a body of information on the projects to form future activities. Bridge, on their part, put together a development plan so everybody is crystal clear about what their plan is for the project. And this development plan just doesn't fast forward 12 months, but it goes through each step of clinical development, what indications would be their entry indications, what biomarkers would be used, what translational resources would be brought to bear, how the drug substance is going to be made. So it's extremely detailed so that everybody is aware of what the plan is. But projects don't have to go through the TDI. They can come direct to Bridge, and they're offered more flexibility. A project can be given an early project, for example, can be given an option structure that says, looking forward, if we achieve these milestones that make the project seem more viable, let's do that first. Let's fund that first before that we move forward to a full development plan and license. Bridge Medicine is therapeutic agnostic, it's modality agnostic. Projects are coming from TDI, from small molecules, from biologics. We entertain really any type of good idea, composition of matter, having a molecule or an agent and a proof of concept is really what we need to get this project underway. And we do have, and as I said, I chair a very active Bridge Scientific Advisory Board and a very, very committed board of directors who review and approve the projects before final entry. But again, it's a big conversation all the way through. No surprises as we move forward with these collaborations. And my final slide is actually just a thank you slide. So that if we move on to the next slide, yeah. So leaders, innovators, investors, there's so many people from the institutions, from the funds, and from the greater scientific community that are committed to this. I won't mention all of them, but a big thank you to all of them, and a special call out to the TDI team. That's it. I hope I didn't talk for longer than 10 minutes.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. And an interesting example, nice on that last slide, just to really see the the collaboration of the three main centers working. We'll talk more about that during our discussion. So last but not least, in our five-person panel is Lisa Plakanika, Senior Managing Director at the Center for Technology Licensing at, I think it's Weill Cornell Medicine. Lisa, welcome. I look forward to your own remarks. And I think you've got a few slides as well, perhaps.
Just a few slides, yes. Thank you all for inviting me to participate. I am a new member to the Weill Cornell family. I just joined the office in September of this year. So Weill Cornell Medicine is the medical college and the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences for Cornell University. So we're located here in New York City on the Upper East Side. So we're a bit remote from the mothership and the university. And the mission of Weill Cornell is to care, discover, and teach. And so discover is the main, portion of innovation and why I'm here to talk with you today. And the goal is really to translate breakthroughs and revolutionize care. We have about 300 million in total funding. 165 million of that is from NIH. Are the slides going to come up?
There they go. Yep.
Thank you. And we have a pretty active clinical trial base. In 2018, 2019, there were 3,000 peer-reviewed journal publications, and we have 500,000 square feet of research space on the Upper East Side. Next slide, please. Cornell is going through growth. There's about 450 funded PIs, 225 of those have NIH funding. But remarkably, there's been a 35% five-year growth rate in NIH funding. We've added 6 new NIH funded faculty within the past 2 years. That's a combination of young investigators that have been recruited who are coming off their seed packages and receiving initial NIH funding, along with recruitment of seasoned principal investigators with their own NIH funding. There's also been a 25% five-year growth in the research space to accommodate this growth in investigators. Our faculty are world-renowned. We only have 1 Nobel Prize laureate, but that's still pretty nice to have. Next slide, please. And part of why I was brought to Cornell is that the pieces of the innovation ecosystem puzzle at Weill Cornell have been a bit scattered across the institution, and there has not been a holistic approach to assembling them all to work in a synergistic fashion. So CTL is the Center for Technology Licensing. We handle intellectual property management and strategy and formation of commercial development partnerships. But other pieces of this innovation ecosystem include our Biopharma Alliance Group, which is responsible for pipeline building and forming research partnerships in the early stages of asset development. Part of the Biopharma Alliance Group is our eLabs team, who's responsible for mentorship and education for innovation and entrepreneurship. And they run a very rigorous program helping to train scientists to think like business people. We have a asset accelerator fund called the Daedalus Fund, which is responsible for small proof of concept asset de-risking funding to move assets from potentially too early to partnerable stage. And we are, of course, a very active member of the TDI and Bridge Medicines collaboration. So my goal and focus at Cornell as I get my feet under me and learn everything there is to learn is to figure out the best way to fit these puzzle pieces together in a synergistic fashion to really accelerate innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And yeah, welcome to the club, I guess. It'll be a fun ride, I'm sure. So we've got lots of time for discussion. We'd love to get questions from you, the audience. So
Kevin, we have one member of the audience, Bruce Conway from Rockefeller, who has his hand up. So I'm going to
go ahead.
Bruce.
Yes, I did not actually intend to have my hand up. Sorry about that. I'll put it back down now, but I'm sorry about that.
Okay, well, Bruce, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you do at Rockefeller.
Sure, I'll be very brief. So I work with Tim, and I oversee the Robertson Therapeutic Development Fund, which is a now $55 million fund, which is intended to advance programs from early proof of concept all the way up to and including Rockefeller Hospital and even outside. So, but I don't want to steal any thunder, so I'll just keep it simple. Thank you.
Actually, I have to interject and just say that this is fantastic. I'm so relieved to see that attendees can be called upon, because I've seen that both Bruce and Jeannie Farrell are attending, and they're my training wheels on these topics. So,
but we should try to not raise our hand accidentally.
Oh dear. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, well, Bruce, thank you for that excellent sparkling contribution. And, but for the rest of the audience, whether you put your hand up or just add a question in the Q&A box, and we'll weave those into the conversation as we get them. I'd like to, and Mitch, don't just sit there mute. You're welcome to chime in at any time.
I have unmuted, and I was waiting for my window of opportunity.
Yeah, well, right now, go ahead.
Perfect. So the good news is that everybody on this call is a client. So I can't offend anyone. Well, I actually could offend all of them. So we do a significant amount of design for the MEP systems for research laboratories for all of it. We did the Rockefeller building at Memorial, and the new building, the Belford Center at Cornell, and Hess at Mount Sinai. Many of these facilities are translational medicine, the purpose of which is to speed the time between benchtop and clinical application. I was most intrigued, Kathleen, by the 3 academic institutions working together, and the question is that open to other institutions? As an example, Mount Sinai with their Hess Research Center does a significant amount of translational research. We were involved in the mind-brain behavior at Columbia, also translational research. How do they take advantage of these accelerating programs to get this stuff out and developed, like you're doing with your facility?
Should I start, and then others can join in? So the way that the Bridge Medicine's actually been created and formed, the 3 institutions that I mentioned and Takeda are the sort of the founding sponsors, as it were. And so from the point of view of projects coming into Bridge, we are exclusive to those institutions. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the folks involved in those projects cannot form broader collaborations with other institutions in not just the local environment, but more broadly. But in terms of actual projects coming in, that is somewhat exclusive. However, this model is being replicated with other institutions. And there was some discussion at the beginning, theoretical discussion about, do you bring more institutions into the same Bridge Medicine, or do you basically have multiple Bridge Medicines? And the fact that it operates very broadly, but from a very small core base, makes it more attractive to clone Bridge Medicines and have multiple Bridge Medicines. And in some cases, these groups work with just one institution. In other cases, like this one, there are multiples of institutions. But that's the model that's being promoted, and certainly Deerfield, as one of the principal investors, as I said, they're very passionate about this as a way forward, and they have formed several of these academic bridge types of units.
Yeah, if I could just follow on, if you don't mind, Kevin.
Please.
Having been here for the creation of both TDI and Bridge, I think Kathleen and I have understandably painted a very rosy picture of how this all operates. You can only imagine the sausage factory of actually getting together 3 major institutions, 3 tech transfer offices, 3 general counsels, 3 presidents, and actually making this thing happen. So by the time we get it together and build it, it's not that we haven't talked about expansion and inviting others, and we have talked about it, we've thought about it. It's gotten to a point over these last 5 to 7 years where with an annual budget of over 20 million, the institutions have invested a lot in this. And so it's not trivial to figure out how one would simply add another institution. Certainly working with other institutions, I think both Pete Meinke, the current director of TDI, as well as his predecessor, were really instrumental in helping to develop as Kathleen alluded to, mimicking TDI upstate with 3 institutions. And they've launched that with the support of the state. So that there's all sorts of models out there, but simply adding on a 4th wheel or a 5th wheel to TDI is not a trivial endeavor. Sorry, Kathleen, but one more note, and that is, I keep harping on this, and Kathleen alluded to it too, but just I can't overstate the advantages of the fact that the 3 institutions literally share this street corner. Doing it remotely with another institution, it adds an additional layer of complexity. The physical proximity has been a really important recipe, element of the recipe for the success to date. Sorry, Kathleen.
No, I all of that was so true. And as I wasn't involved in some of the sausage making, as you put it, but as a bystander, I could certainly appreciate that. But it's a scalability of science issue too. Again, from the core, this works virtually across a lot of different organizations, and there comes a point that there's a tipping point in effectiveness if you bring too much into the same particular model.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to comment on the bridge model? There's some unique factors that make it work for the reasons that Tim and Kathleen have mentioned, but do you see this potentially happening in other parts of the region?
Well, Erik, you at Mount Sinai have a really innovative model that you've followed in terms of generating these companies. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about it, because you actually will work with outside entrepreneurs that come to you as long as there's a nexus to Mount Sinai and the science and medicine, right?
Yeah, the vast majority of the portfolio that we have is what we refer to as inside out, right? Which is technologies that were developed inside of Mount Sinai, and then we're working on advancing them and licensing them. We do upwards to 70 licenses a year. With COVID-19, we've been extremely active. We have one of the top infectious disease teams in the world, and licensing is quite a bit higher this year. But we also have a program, what we call Outside In, which is working with companies or entrepreneurs that come to us that may have technologies that we're interested in deploying in our clinical enterprise or our research enterprise, or just have a great track record and are looking for something to pursue. And in some of those cases, we're able to partner with them and take them forward. You mentioned Renalytics earlier, and Renalytics was the genesis of an outside entity that had licensed some technology from another institution that brought in members of the current executive team to look at how to pursue those technologies. And those individuals met with investigators from Mount Sinai at a national meeting, and one thing led to another, and we recognized an opportunity to marry some of the technology from Mount Sinai with what the company already had, and that led to the formation of Renalytics, and obviously tremendous success and growth over the last few years. So those are the kind of models that we like. Bridge is a great program, but these kind of programs they exist all over the country, in fact all over the world, where you're bringing individuals with expertise together with investigators who may not have that same expertise, and helping to advance technologies to later stages. And certainly in our own program, as we think about technologies, whether it's something foundational for a drug or device in the diagnostic field or digital health now, we think of digital health really kind of care management, digital therapeutics, and then also in research tools and platforms. We look at each one of those and we try to try to develop as holistic an understanding of that technology as it relates to the marketplace. What else is in the marketplace? Competition, opportunity, funding, and certainly challenges that we might face taking something forward. And so the opportunities that we ultimately take forward are those where, you know, we've developed a clear understanding, invested in them, identified partners, whether those partners are other existing companies or investors, and then move them forward into what we think of as kind of early commercialization versus research. We also think a lot about what we've coined as commercially relevant translational research at Mount Sinai, which really is translational research, but understanding what is the commercial framework that has to be applied to take any nascent or early stage technology to later stages that would warrant pursuing them commercially. So I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some of my thoughts on that issue.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how many models there are actually.
Great. I want to encourage questions from the audience. So I'm going to take this one that came in a couple of minutes ago from John, who asks, is there sufficient support for entrepreneurs post-university launch? I'd welcome anyone's input on that.
And I think the question, when I saw that, the thing that came to mind is there's a lot of different flavors of support. And so I was a little curious in terms of the question, which type of support is the individual referring to? I mean, for support obviously can be support from a professional perspective, a field perspective, expertise. Funding is obviously an enormous issue. I
would wager it means funding, but John is welcome to embellish his question and clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly there's a fairly significant amount of funding that is available, and there's creative ways to, increasingly creative ways to fund advancing technology and start companies. I think one of the things that's really critical, and one of the things that we've really focused on at Mount Sinai, is trying to be incredibly good partners with the entrepreneurs and the companies that are created and the entrepreneurs that we're working with. Companies have to move quickly, they have to be nimble, and they need a partner that can act similarly. And we've gone to great lengths to make sure that we can work with our companies or with our partners in a manner where things can move forward in a timely manner. So I think support from the institution, from the perspective of being a good partner, is also very important. And then I also think that there's tremendous opportunities as we think about academic medical centers that include both strong research enterprises and clinical enterprises, to think more broadly about how you kind of build the continuum from research to translation to actually into clinical trials, and how the clinical enterprise can play a key role in that, as well as the research enterprise.
Anyone else like to respond to that question?
You know, I'll just echo Erik's comments. I think a lot of it does depend on kind of what support you're looking for. I think all of the academic medical centers or universities that are spinning out companies, you know, we do see them as part of the family. So we will make those connections to investors, to the networks, to help identify entrepreneurs or executive business team, to help fledgling companies who are not, you know, being started by the Arches and the Atlases and the Deerfields of the world. Our goal is to help match them with the resources. I think a lot of universities will, you know, work with the entrepreneurs to structure licenses in a way that they can, you know, reserve cash up front, and, you know, maybe payment plans for patent expenses. So little things that are not exactly cash investment, but can help companies that have small amounts of investment, you know, preserve that cash for as long as possible.
Yeah, I would just add onto both of those answers. Another element of support that's been a recurring theme in this symposium is affordable space. And again, for these fledgling companies, the best space is affordable space that's as local as possible. At that very startup stage, you really want these startup companies to be as close as possible to the scientific founders, to that expertise, And I've heard a lot about that in this conference and beyond, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but just to put it out there, it's an important thing that I think the city and the state and others have taken very seriously. There's been a lot of strides in that, and want to compliment lots of the people here, lots of the people attending, including the EDC and others. There's been significant progress in that really important area, and I mentioned we're hoping to contribute to that too on the Upper East Side.
Yeah, and just
I know that Einstein has a really interesting model of services through their cores. And we had the dean speaking at one of our webinars earlier this year, and talking about how you actually offer that support to the entire community. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and just following up on Tim's point as well, having that local affordable space at the very early stages for some of these new COs that are looking for SBIR, STTR funding, and they really just need one bench to test some of their experiments, and that hand-holding before we ship them out and tell them to go figure it out is really important. So Einstein actually has available lab space here with the contraction a few years back that we've been able to rent out a bench at a time as investigators need it. Most of them are these new co-startups that are either licensing Einstein technology or are aware of Einstein through other mechanisms. So that's been very helpful from that hand-holding point of view. And since they are on campus, getting access to the cores, they don't even need to worry about, figuring out how to ship samples. It's literally they could walk it themselves. So our cores are available to Einstein researchers, to outside entities, and to industry. And a lot of it from a commercialization point of view, from really accessing and being able to market it, is available on the iLab Solutions website. So people even in other states can access some of our services, and there are competitive rates with highly qualified, skilled people that are at Einstein doing this on a daily basis.
And you actually offer that through the Science Exchange also, right?
Yep. Yep.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about what the Science Exchange is.
So the Science Exchange is an online platform that helps to match what a person is looking for with the skilled expertise available. So it's a bit of a matchmaking program with shared facilities and resources. So you don't need to buy, multi-million-dollar piece of equipment to run one experiment.
So that's very important for making the resources available at Einstein to the broader community.
Right, at competitive rates.
Yes.
I'd like to go round the panel again with a sort of a two-part question. Erik, in particular, singled out one company that successfully went public. And I'd like to just sort of probe a little bit more into your own operations and ask you, are there any one or two specific examples or success stories that you can point to in the recent past, or something that's bubbling up now that you're really excited about that you would like to talk about? And I'm also interested in widening the lens. Are there particular technologies, are there particular areas, whether it be CRISPR or AI, or are you seeing sort of a real momentum in certain types of technology that are going to really keep you busy over the next 5 years or whatever? Janis, shall we start with you?
Sure. I think especially in light of the current pandemic we're in, Einstein has a really large skill set and expertise in infectious disease. Prior to the pandemic, funding in infectious disease was always, low on the list because global health needs didn't always translate to the US and developing world market. For example, we have a technology that's related to chikungunya virus, and chikungunya virus is usually transmitted by mosquitoes in the southern hemisphere. But with impending climate change, there's a high likelihood that it'll meet the states. I think the pandemic and the translation of how relevant infectious disease control, mitigation, and therapeutics is really transforming the commercial appetite for some of these technologies. One area in the infectious disease space from a collaborative point of view that we've been working on is really matching our expertise with other partners. So there's a network that we've established through a consortium grant that enables Einstein as the discovery research engine to work on developing antibodies, working with a commercial partner who could then do the scale up, send it back to us for testing. And then there's also a built-in licensing structure there. So I think that programs like that to get the appetite early are interesting. And especially now, again, with the current climate, there's a lot of opportunities that we're working on in the infectious disease space. So I'm excited about that. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to do that, but I'm very excited about that. And Einstein's well slated. In terms of our portfolio, at least a quarter of our portfolio of marketable assets, intellectual property that comes through Einstein is in the infectious disease space. So this is a prime time.
Great answer, Janis. Thank you. Erik.
Sorry to put myself on mute for a moment. Where do I start? You know, I think given the time that we're in, as Janis said, you know, I'll focus my comments on items related to COVID. Mount Sinai has an enormous portfolio of technologies that we're moving forward. We have a substantial number that are moving into later stages from a development perspective. So really prime for commercial conversations, and they span, you know, immunology, oncology, cardiology, infectious disease. Obviously, we have an extremely strong team there that's got one of the highest levels of NIH funding in the country. So, but if I focus some comments on COVID-19, one of the things that was very I'd say rewarding for us is that Florian Kramer, one of our premier investigators and a global key opinion leader in COVID-19, as well as flu, and specifically the relationship between the human immune system and virus-borne diseases, identified the need for an assay to examine the development of antibodies to COVID-19 in human beings very early. And by March, we had taken Florian's assay from the basic research laboratory to our clinical lab, and in March and April received approval from New York State as an LDT, as well as an EUA from, or emergency use approval from, or authorization from the FDA. We formed a company in about 8 weeks around that asset and partnered with Biotechnology Corporation to develop a kit form that can be made available to all laboratories within the United States or anywhere really within the world. And we just received actually our CE mark this week for 2 kits. And these assays very, very reliably, highly accurate, detect the amount of antibody to SARS-CoV-2 spike protein in an individual, and correlate that result with the presence of neutralizing antibodies that would be the basis for protection from the virus. So that's an example of really kind of working around the clock for a period of time to go from an asset in a laboratory to now a CE mark roughly 7 or 8 months later. We're obviously moving forward on other regulatory fronts as well. In terms of COVID-19, we also have an experimental vaccine that is under development based on a vaccine platform that our investigators have created. Peter Palese, obviously one of the key individuals there, another KOL. And a fairly significant number of human monoclonal antibodies that have neutralizing activity against the virus in the picomolar range, and we're moving those assets forward as well. We're still characterizing them, but anticipate that those would be something that, again, could really contribute to public benefit, really global public benefit. So those are things that we're very excited about in terms of the current work that we're doing, and represent some of the programs that are more advanced.
Thanks, Erik. Do you have a pharma partner for the vaccine candidate, or is that something being talked about now?
It's really in process, and so it is under development with commercial partners, and that is likely to expand as well. There's also work going on within our own GMP facility at Mount Sinai for producing initial GMP grade materials.
Well, we wish you every success with that project for sure. Tim.
So yeah, I guess I'll pick up on that in terms of COVID work in particular. At Rockefeller, I mentioned the size of the faculty being about 75 people. It was actually surprising and somewhat inspiring that starting in March, over a third of our faculty sort of pivoted on a dime and became researchers in COVID-19. That was while there were some obvious candidates for doing that. The broad pickup of that right away was really terrific, and is being maintained to this day. In terms of some of the specific projects, probably to kind of combine Rockefeller's story, like along the lines of what Erik was talking about, project development at Mount Sinai, along with the COVID-19. Probably one of our most high-profile stories comes out of the lab of Michel Nussenswag, who has developed. He's an expert in a method for identifying broadly neutralizing antibodies that was developed over the years, most recently for HIV. And again, the project was developed largely with internal funds, as well as some funds from the Gates Foundation, developed clinically initially at the Rockefeller University Hospital. And we were able to then partner just last year with Gilead on a project that was basically in the clinic and ready to go, without having partnered earlier on with pharma or with other companies. And obviously that just makes the asset, if you will, that much more attractive and valuable, and that's a model that really works. Interestingly and not surprisingly, what Michel was able to do was convert that program instantaneously to developing neutralizing antibodies against SARS-CoV-2, and that program is now to a point where I think we're planning to start phase 1 as early as next month or the beginning of December with these antibodies that seem to have some really promising characteristics. Anticipating your next question, Kevin, of if that's partnered with pharma, the answer is yes. But I don't think it's actually been quite papered yet. And Jeannie Farrell has told me that she's at a computer without a microphone, so I'm not allowed to call on her. So unless I get a text that allows me to say any more, I'm going to stop there.
That's fine. Kathleen, let's pass it over to you.
Well, I think that Tim and the others have spoken so elegantly about how these powerhouse institutions can be mobilized at a time like this to add real power. And I think that's fantastic. At Bridge Medicine, our focus is much narrower. And in a year, if I could, or somebody could come to this conference or this type of conference and say that we had successfully opened an IND to start clinical trials, I think you'd see us all sort of raising the flag up the flag post and declaring at least one step forward in victory. The group have done a tremendous amount navigating their way through COVID without hopefully missing too many beats. And they have certainly been there. And I know they have been approached as a resource for folks on the campus who are, as Tim described and others, figuring out how they can, add their expertise to these efforts. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'm just going to let me just focus or prompt you. Is there a specific project that you're personally really excited about, or are you seeing, as you look at the portfolio of projects coming through, any trends, any particular technologies, whether it be infectious disease or genomics or big data or whatever, that we should be keeping our eye open on?
I don't think there is actually one thing that I would pull out. What I would say is that what I see is a very rapid uptake, and you mentioned some of the technologies yourself, new gene editing techniques. How do you apply that? even sort of what I would call bioengineering based techniques, 3D printing, and this is how do we apply that? But what we try and do, and this is sort of the core of drug discovery, and this is really bridge, as I said, a bridge, is to say, how can we impact the critical path with new technology without being drawn into left field questions with new technologies? And so rather than pursuing one ourselves, we are so focused on picking and choosing the appropriate tools to use. And you see that, I would say, within Bridge and beyond in the immediate portfolio, most obviously in oncology, and that there are a lot of oncology projects that need very much precision medicine techniques to make them most impactful, particularly when you think about the clinical programs.
Thanks, Kathleen. And Lisa.
Great. Yes. Well, as I said, I've only been at Weill for 2 months now, so I'm still sifting through and trying to digest the portfolio. But I think it's no surprise that we have a lot of interesting assets in, the oncology space, neuroscience, inflammation, microbiology, what I'll call kind of data analytics, and how that can be applied to both drug discovery and diagnostics. Part of my remit is to take kind of a high-level overview of the portfolio and start to understand how some of these assets can be fit together and packaged for commercial development and partnership, both with new companies and existing companies. So I think there's a lot to be launched and spun out soon.
So Lisa, I noticed one part of your the environment, the ecosystem that you've got at Weill Cornell is this biopharma alliance.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
So they are what I would refer to as sort of the pipeline builders, right? So they have two main remits. One is the eLabs function, which is structured mentorship and educational opportunities for faculty and students on business-related matters to innovation. So teaching scientists how to be businessmen and helping them form ideas and a story around their research. The other remit of the Biopharma Alliances Group is to bring research partnerships to early stage research to help germinate the development of intellectual property assets. So those can be co-development partnerships, early stage research partnerships, master relationships, with the goal of generating intellectual property that is interesting to the commercial sector.
Interesting.
Right, so I mean, they simply are able to identify more readily commercialized opportunities.
A little bit different. I mean, it's more about germinating it, right? So there's an interesting research project that could lead to something, but it's not there yet. So it's helping to find sources of funding from the commercial sector that can help develop that research program along a more commercial trajectory to develop an asset.
So this is sort of a toss-up question for all of you. During each of your presentations, you've identified certain issues that have been, I'll use the term rate determining factors, one of which was readily available space that's affordable, which is really the sort of the mission that we Nancy and I have set up for the New York City Builds Bio Plus. What are the other hurdles that inhibit or slow down the process of getting from the bench out to the clinical application and ultimately the consumer and patients? Is it money? Is it space? Is it lack of time? Lack of appropriate support staff? I mean, what are some of the things that we can help identify?
Yeah, well, so one of the most obvious, or one of the most, I think is the most central issue at times, is funding for the type of research that needs to be done to bridge from early stage discovery to commercially relevant asset. And so some people refer to this as kind of the valley of death. I almost think it's before that in a way, that there's funding, there needs to be significant funding for very, very, very high risk research on programs that could, right? And I'm really emphasizing could have commercial relevance. but you'll never know if they will be commercially relevant unless you do that research. Now, obviously, programs will mature over time. You know, there's plenty of examples of programs that over 10, 15, et cetera, years have ultimately produced an asset that was commercially relevant, and then there's investment and it moves forward. I think one of the things that we're most focused on is how can we identify the assets that could have potential, make some good decisions there, and then apply, again, capital to what is a very, very high risk endeavor, which is to accelerate them into or to a point where they're commercially relevant, and a partner, an investor, a company, what have you, can start to make really a rational decision about those assets. You can continue to get NIH grants, foundation grants, what have you, but that tends to be a much slower way to advance these kinds of assets. And so, again, we look for items that we think might have the potential, and then as quickly as we can, we try to apply capital to them to find out. The capital is not applied in a general kind of grant format. It's applied in a milestone-based format. And if the project fails at a milestone and there's no clear path forward, then the funding stops. And so that's one way to mitigate the risk associated. But I think these are very important. This is one of the most important things. The other thing within an academic enterprise is having enough resources that can advise the researchers on what are the next relevant experiments, what are the next relevant steps to go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to ultimately a commercially relevant asset that, as Tim pointed out, the later you get, and frankly, the faster you get there, the higher the value the asset. Speed is obviously important, because if somebody else puts something in the marketplace, then you may have missed your opportunity. So I think that expertise and the funding is really, really critical. But again, I don't want to lose sight of the fact, because like Bridge, we all have these programs to provide great resources and advice, and what I think of at times as coaching on what's necessary to be done. But what is lacking, I think, in many institutions is enough of those resources to really survey the portfolio and start making the decisions that need to be made, and then funding them, so that you have a larger number of assets that move into a later stage.
So just to follow on from that, I mean, as I described, Bridge, it was pre-funded to try and remove some of these barriers. And so it's a model where an investigator can theoretically and in practice go right through to clinical trials without having to raise a dollar, which is actually an amazing asset for them. What we find is that it's all about people at the end of the day, and we're focused on minimizing disruption in speed, because speed is money, and sequencing things. So not everything is done in parallel to waste money, but things are appropriately sequenced to use capital wisely with rigorous no-goes, as you say, so that you don't overspend on something that's not going to reach critical milestones. But we have to be always vigilant, because there are what I would think of as unforced errors. There are potential downsides in handoffs. There are potential downsides in not getting the right collaborators and doing the right experiments. It's not a perfect process. So I think on all of the sides in terms of leadership, making sure that the science and the business agreements and terms and everything else is pre-thought of and goes in parallel to minimize any kind of disruption is really key. It's that very strong collaboration between not just the scientists involved, who tend to have their own heads in whatever their new CRISPR technique is tomorrow, but the business people to facilitate the licensing agreements and the enabling business around these projects.
Yeah, and I would say just to add on to Erik and Kathleen's comments on that, I want to pick up. Erik made a really important point, and Kathleen also alluded to it, of the not just the funding, but the expertise and the access to the expertise, because that's not something that was historically or typically found in our academic institutions. And we all have different, Erik has said, we all have these different programs and ways of trying to do that, but we found in ours, while the money was necessary, obviously, the model of bringing in outside experts as the reviewers for these things. So we have the money, but the reviewers are all brought in from outside with expertise in in biopharma, in industry, et cetera. And that becomes someone used the word coaching. So what our faculty are getting at that point is feedback on specifically you're not there yet, but here's what it would take to get there. And sometimes even when they don't get the funding, they establish a relationship with someone with the right expertise to help them get there. That's proven to be just as important. The threading of the needle there, and Kathleen, we've gone through this together with TDI as well as Bridge, is at least what we don't want in our programs is the outside experts coming in and quashing what Erik alluded to as high risk science. And so and we also don't want them coming in our case, and saying there's no market for that. We're still academic institutions, and we want the science to drive what we're doing. And so if you've got great science that has potential, that's where we want to thread the needle with all these programs.
Yeah, just to punctuate Tim's point, we at Sinai, we've invested heavily in building innovation partners and building the skills of being able to make judgment calls that are prudent, but at this extremely high risk stage. Because we're investing in dreams at times, I say, right? We have to invest in dreams, and we just have to do it as prudently as we potentially can. But these are assets that it would be easy for an outside individual who is investing at a different stage to say, well, wow, that's just way too early, or it doesn't fit with our model, or right. And so sometimes it's really important, or I guess I would say, I do think it's very important for the institution to have the expertise internally to, again, invest in dreams.
Yeah, no, as Tim put it, it's a fine balance.
Yeah, and I think it's also an interesting point, going back to even what Janis was saying, is that, as academic, institutions, we do have a fiduciary obligation to ensure that any technology that seems like it could be translated into the marketplace, we push on that and we invest in it to some extent. So technologies that might not be sexy for your typical investor, we still have to find avenues to at least try to get them onto the marketplace. So it's an extra challenge or burden, but I think an important one that we take on as academic, business commercialization experts.
So thinking about dreams for the future, obviously Senator Schumer outlined a grand vision on last Friday for future investment in frontier technologies like the ones that you all have just been talking about. Not only $100 million for individual investments, but also $100 billion.
Billion with a B.
Yeah, also an additional 10 billion for 10 regional tech hubs. And obviously, New York needs to organize itself to compete for one of those designations. And so when you think about New York or the greater New York area as a regional life science genomics tech hub, how should we organize ourselves? Obviously, the academic institutions are going to be a very important part of that. We need the biopharma partners to come in. We need investors. We're going to need the workforce training elements that are here in the city. We're going to have to knit all of these pieces of the fabric together into a very compelling vision for the future, for our future, in order to obtain this investment. So I'd love to, have the last several minutes of this discussion begin our organizing, which we're going to start after the symposium by reaching out to all of you. How would you think about doing that? what would be your priorities? What's your dream?
I mean, it's kind of a broad question, but in terms of just thinking kind of practically about what one could do is, New York City held a request for information for concepts related to creating a life sciences hub within New York City, greater New York City metropolitan area. And I know a number of parties participated in putting forward pretty extensive ideas on what that could look like. And, leveraging those might be a way to start the conversation. I think there's no question, at least in my mind, that New York City would certainly deserve to be a technology hub, particularly in healthcare and life sciences, with the strength of the academic foundation that we have, the amount of NIH and other funding dollars that come to the region. New York is one of the, really the top premier areas in the country. And so I would assume that we could put together a very compelling proposal or argument for being one of those sites. And I just think that, maybe there's a lot of material that already exists in terms of getting that started based on what was done a couple of years ago as various organizations thought about those issues.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yep.
Any other responses to Nancy's question?
Well, I don't spend my days living and breathing this as many of you do on this, but one of the things I think that is really important is to acknowledge that now more than ever, the different tech disciplines and engineering disciplines are coming together to create, and we talked about it earlier, to create, incredibly powerful, and some of it is still ideas, and I don't know how you put it, aspirational stuff. I can't remember what you said, Erik, but it was perfect, around how do you bring smart technology, artificial intelligence, everything together to be able to promote the wellness as well as the treatment industry. And I would say that those folks have to be brought into this conversation. It's beyond just biopharma, but it's talk really to the great, sort of tech industry networks within the region and engineering networks.
Yeah,
Well,
we talk a lot about the convergence of fields, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's biology, chemistry, physics, information technology, obviously we're living in a time of tremendous convergence. And I think, I don't remember if it was Tim or who, but someone mentioned precision or personalized medicine. And really the foundation of precision medicine is going to be advanced diagnostics. It's going to be critical for that. And then of course there's precision therapeutics that go with that. But the marriage of information technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and diagnostics is really transformative, and the opportunities to create meaningful solutions that have a enormous positive impact on human health is really tremendous. And I think we're seeing, we're starting to see the development of and the utilization of those technologies. One of the things that's critical for that can truly accelerate the development of those kinds of technologies is very, very, very well curated biobanks that where you've got samples from individuals, say plasma, nucleic acid, and you've also got de-identified health information that is linked to those samples, and have that in a format where you've got longitudinal samples and longitudinal information. And that can be truly transformative. And when I think, again, this is obviously a very specific comment, but when I think about New York City, the density of population, the number of academic medical centers and other clinical enterprises, I think we have tremendous opportunities there, as well as the high-tech industry that is clearly very prominent within New York.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had not thought about curated biobanks, but a part of what this hub would be to create these kind of specialized facilities that would advance discovery and medical treatment to the next level. And so one of those cores, so to speak, could be something like a curated biobank. We heard a lot on Tuesday about the requirement for pilot GMP facilities in the city, especially around engineering biology, with the new kind of consumer biology, what was coined consumer biology around food and new materials and palm oil, compounds that are important. So yeah, that's really something to put on the list.
Yeah, I agree with that last statement regarding GMP facilities. And in particular, at least my opinion is that very specialized facilities, right, having all of the general capabilities of like a CRO that can do GMP, et cetera, is critical. But actually having those facilities also include very specialized capabilities. We have a GMP facility at Mount Sinai. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's being deployed for production of some initial virus stocks, vaccine stocks. It's also historically been used in oncology-based vaccines and other programs. And so that organization, because it is also integrated into our research enterprise, can provide very, very sophisticated and very specialized services that you may not be able to find elsewhere. In fact, I think that you wouldn't find elsewhere generally.
If I could just add one more attribute to the list that we've accumulated with all these speakers of New York City as sort of a national and international hub for these areas. One attribute that I don't think has been mentioned, unless I missed it, is not just the population size and the density, but the genetic diversity that one has access to in and around New York.
Totally agree.
Very good. I think we're coming close to the end of our time. I wanted to slip in one final question for Tim. Tim, you mentioned the Women in Science Fund, and I don't know how unusual this is, but it really struck a chord with me. 2020 is the centenary of Rosalind Franklin's birth. We hosted a great webinar from Matthew Cobb on the life and times of Rosalind Franklin. I'll put the link in the chat. I absolutely urge you to watch this. It's a 30-minute fantastic talk about, you'll learn so much about what Franklin did. Not that she was cheated out of potentially one, not cheated, but she missed out on one Nobel Prize. Matthew argues she may have missed out on 2 Nobel Prizes because of her premature death. We just had the great feel-good moment of Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier winning the Nobel Prize for chemistry, but it needs more tangible support. I'd love to just give you 60 seconds to say what you're doing to encourage and support your women entrepreneurs.
So I'll say this is building, as I think I mentioned, on a program that I believe is about 2 decades old here at Rockefeller. Our Women in Science program started with the inspiration of some of our trustees, as well as Marnie Imhoff. And it's a program that for years has yielded funds from benefactors to support our women scientists at all levels. And there's an annual gala that gets a lot of support that is one of the highlights on campus every year. And what we've done in the past year was try to build on that, specifically in the area of entrepreneurship. One of the things we noticed, at least locally, I don't know how widespread this is that in some of our translational funds, our women were underrepresented relative to the pool. And we wanted to try and take that on directly. I've already talked to Bruce and Marnie and others about now making sure that we think about diversity more broadly than just women, and where we can make an impact there. But specifically, the Women Entrepreneurship Fund will function similarly to the Robertson Fund, only we're really going to have specific focus, specific programs and issues for women and other individuals who can enhance diversity.
Very good. Well, Nancy, would you like to close things out? I think we've come to the end of our 90 minutes, a very engaging discussion. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists and Mitch and everyone else for a really engaging discussion.
Yeah, this was great. And, this is kind of just the first step in beginning to organize ourselves for a very exciting future. And so we'll be reaching out to all of you again to get you involved in the process of both trying to get the Endless Frontier Act passed, but also in applying to be one of these frontier hubs for the future. So thanks so much for your time and all of your thoughts and wisdom.
And I echo everything that Nancy has said. Thank you all. Terrific.